Let's compare Windows XP with Windows Server 2003. On the left we have Windows XP which was released in 2001 and on the right we have Windows Server 2003 which was released in 2003. Windows Server 2003 is the server version of Windows XP. Windows XP is NT version 5.1 and Windows Server 2003 is NT version 5.2. Windows XP x64 edition is NT version 5.2. Windows XP has both the Luna theme and the Classic theme. Windows Server 2003 only has the Classic theme. Windows Server 2003 also has less screensavers than Windows XP. In Windows XP, when you drag a window around, it moves in real time. In Windows Server 2003, it just moves an outline and the window only moves when you let go. They both have the modern Start menu, and the Classic Start menu is still an option in both. In Windows XP, when you click Control Panel on the Start menu, it comes up in a window. In Windows Server 2003, it comes up in a list. In Windows Server 2003, there are more administrative tools than there are in Windows XP, including Manage Your Server. Windows Server 2003 also has administrative tools on the right column of the Start menu, which Windows XP does not. In Windows Server 2003, the My Music, My Pictures, and My Videos folders are not present. In Windows XP, there is a pane at the left of Windows Explorer. In Windows Server 2003, there is not. Windows XP also shows Documents folders in My Computer, which Windows Server 2003 does not. Windows XP also comes with some games. Windows Server 2003 does not. Windows XP also comes with Windows Media Player and Windows Movie Maker, which Windows Server 2003 does not. In Windows XP, the username on the Start menu has a profile picture next to it. In Windows Server 2003, it does not. In Windows XP, the shutdown dialog has icons. In Windows Server 2003, it has a drop-down menu. In Windows XP, there is an option to switch user. In Windows Server 2003, there is not. Let's compare the login screen. In Windows XP, it is full screen and you click your username to log on. In Windows Server 2003, it is in a window on a gray background and you type your username to log on. In Windows Server 2003, you also have to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to log on. In Windows XP, you can shut down directly from the login screen. In Windows Server 2003, you have to log in before you can shut down. In Windows XP, pressing Ctrl-Alt-Delete while logged in opens Task Manager. In Windows Server 2003, it brings up Windows Security and one of the options is Task Manager. In Windows XP, Task Manager has a shutdown menu. In Windows Server 2003, it does not. In Windows Server 2003, there is an option to lock the computer. In Windows XP, there is not. In Windows XP, under Control Panel, there is an option to disable the welcome screen. If you do this, then Windows XP will have a logon prompt similar to Windows Server 2003. But there are a few differences. In Windows XP, the background behind the login window is blue. In Windows Server 2003, it is gray. In Windows XP, you can shut down directly from the logon prompt without logging in. In Windows Server 2003, the shutdown button is grayed out and you have to log on to shut down. In Windows Server 2003, you have to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to log on. In Windows XP, you do not. However, you can enable the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement in Windows XP by typing Control User Passwords 2 into the Run prompt, and then under the Advanced tab, checking Require users to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete. In Windows Server 2003, this option cannot be unchecked. If the welcome screen is disabled in Windows XP, Ctrl-Alt-Delete will open Windows Security like it does in Windows Server 2003. Task Manager won't have a shutdown menu. There also won't be an option to switch user. There will be an option to lock the computer, and the username on the Start menu won't have a profile picture next to it. In Windows Server 2003, there is no option to enable the welcome screen. In Windows XP, if the welcome screen is disabled, the shutdown dialog will have a drop-down menu like in Windows Server 2003. In Windows Server 2003, it asks you for a reason why you want to shut down. It gives you a list of reasons and then you have to type a comment, and it won't let you shut down until you have typed something. In Windows XP, you just shut down without giving a reason. Let's compare Windows Vista with Windows Server 2008. On the left we have Windows Vista, which was released in 2006, and on the right we have Windows Server 2008, which was released in 2008. Windows Server 2008 is the server version of Windows Vista. They are both NT version 6.0. In Windows Vista, the default desktop wallpaper is some computer-generated lines. In Windows Server 2008, it is a solid color. In Windows Vista there are lots of picture wallpapers available. In Windows Server 2008 there is only one picture wallpaper available. Windows Vista has Aero, Basic, and Classic themes available. Windows Server 2008 only has the Classic theme. Windows Server 2008 has less screensavers than Windows Vista. In Windows Vista when you drag a window around it moves in real time. In Windows Server 2008 it just moves an outline and the window only moves when you let go. Windows Vista has both the Aero mouse cursor and the Classic mouse cursor available, with Aero being the default. Windows Server 2008 only has the Classic mouse cursor. They both have the modern Start menu, and the Classic Start menu is still an option in both. In Windows Vista there is a sidebar which you can add gadgets to. In Windows Server 2008 there is not. In Windows Vista the default power action is standby, and in Windows Server 2008 the default power action is shut down. In Windows Vista when you drag a box on the desktop it has a solid blue outline and a blue transparent fill. In Windows Server 2008 it has a dotted color negative outline and no fill. In Windows Vista there are more control panel items than there are in Windows Server 2008. In Windows Server 2008 there are more administrative tools than there are in Windows Vista, including Server Manager. In Windows Server 2008 the menu bar in Windows Explorer is always visible. In Windows Vista it only comes up when you press the Alt key. However, there is an option to make it always visible. In Windows Server 2008 it is always visible regardless of this option. In Windows Vista when the view is set to large icons, images have thumbnails. In Windows Server 2008 they do not, however this can be changed in both. They both have the music and pictures folders, although Windows Vista displays them on the Start menu which Windows Server 2008 does not. Windows Server 2008 has administrative tools on the Start menu which Windows Vista does not. Windows Vista comes with sample pictures which Windows Server 2008 does not. Windows Vista comes with games, and a load of other applications such as Windows Media Center, Windows Media Player, and Windows Movie Maker which Windows Server 2008 does not. In Windows Vista the Control-Alt-Delete screen background is some blue and green lines. In Windows Server 2008 it is a solid color. Same on the login screen. In Windows Vista there is a power button at the bottom right corner on the login screen where you can shut down without logging in. In Windows Server 2008 you have to log in to shut down. In Windows Server 2008 you also have to press Control-Alt-Delete to log on. In Windows Vista you do not. However, you can enable the Control-Alt-Delete logon requirement in Windows Vista by typing Control User Passwords 2 into the Run prompt, and then under the Advanced tab, checking Require users to press Control-Alt-Delete. In Windows Server 2008 this option cannot be unchecked. In Windows Server 2008 when you go to shut down it asks you for a reason. It gives you a list of reasons and you have to type a description before you can shut down. In Windows Vista it just shuts down without any further dialogue. Pressing Alt F4 on the desktop brings up the classic shutdown dialog in both. In Windows Vista the default action is sleep. In Windows Server 2008 it is shut down. In Windows Server 2008 it asks you for a reason why you want to shut down. In Windows Vista it does not. In Windows Vista, when shutting down, the circle spins. In Windows Server 2008 it is static. It is possible to make Windows Server 2008 a bit more like Windows Vista by adding the Desktop Experience feature. To do this, go to Server Manager, then under Features Summary, click Add Features, and then add the Desktop Experience feature. Enabling the Desktop Experience feature has made the Logon UI loading circle spin like it does in Windows Vista. Enabling Desktop Experience also adds programs like Windows Media Player and Windows Photo Gallery to Windows Server 2008. It hasn't yet enabled the Aero and Basic themes. To get themes, you need to also go to Services and enable the Themes service. And it now has the Windows Vista Basic theme available. But dragging a window still only moves an outline rather than moving in real time, and dragging a box on the desktop still has a dotted outline rather than a blue transparent fill. If you go to System Properties, then Advanced System Settings, then Performance Options, then Adjust per Best Appearance. Then Windows will move around in real time, and dragging a box on the desktop will have a blue transparent fill like in Windows Vista. But it still won't have the Aero mouse cursor, and it still won't have the sidebar gadgets. Let's compare Windows 7 with Windows Server 2008 R2. On the left we have Windows 7 which was released in 2009 and on the right we have Windows Server 2008 R2 which was also released in 2009. Windows Server 2008 R2 is the server version of Windows 7. They are both NT version 6.1. In Windows 7, when you right-click the desktop, there are three options at the bottom: Screen Resolution, Gadgets, and Personalize. In Windows Server 2008 R2 there is only Screen Resolution, there is not Gadgets or Personalize. And Personalization is also missing from Control Panel. In Windows 7 there are three different themes available: Aero, Basic, and Classic. In Windows Server 2008 R2 there is only Classic. In Windows 7, when you drag a window around, it moves in real time. In Windows Server 2008 R2 it just moves an outline and the window only moves when you let go. Windows 7 has both the Aero mouse cursor and the Classic mouse cursor available, with Aero being the default. Windows Server 2008 R2 only has the Classic mouse cursor. In Windows 7 there are gadgets that you can place on the desktop. In Windows Server 2008 R2 there are no gadgets. In Windows Server 2008 R2 there are more administrative tools than there are in Windows 7, including Server Manager. Windows 7 comes with sample pictures which Windows Server 2008 R2 does not. They both have the modern Start menu, neither of them have the option to enable the classic Start menu. In Windows 7 the default power action is shut down, and in Windows Server 2008 R2 it is log off, however this can be changed in both. Windows 7 comes with games which Windows Server 2008 R2 does not. Windows 7 also comes with Windows Media Center and Windows Media Player which Windows Server 2008 R2 does not. In Windows 7 when you drag a box on the desktop it has a solid blue outline and a blue transparent fill. In Windows Server 2008 R2 it has a dotted color negative outline and no fill. In Windows 7 the Control-Alt-Delete screen background is colorful. In Windows Server 2008 R2 it is gray. Same on the login screen. In Windows 7 there is a power button on the login screen. In Windows Server 2008 R2 there is not. In Windows Server 2008 R2 you have to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to log on. In Windows 7 you do not. However, you can enable the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement in Windows 7. In Windows Server 2008 R2 the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement cannot be disabled. In Windows Server 2008 R2 when you go to shut down it asks you for a reason. It gives you a list of reasons and then you have to type a description. In Windows 7 it just shuts down without asking for a reason. Pressing Alt F4 on the desktop brings up the classic shutdown dialog in both. In Windows 7 the default action is shut down. In Windows Server 2008 R2 it is log off. In Windows Server 2008 R2 it asks you for a reason why you want to shut down. In Windows 7 it does not. In Windows 7 when shutting down the circle spins. In Windows Server 2008 R2 it is static. In Windows 7 the boot screen is four colorful glowing balls orbiting and then coming together to form the Windows logo. Windows Server 2008 R2 has the same boot screen as Windows Vista. It is possible to make Windows Server 2008 R2 a bit more like Windows 7 by adding the Desktop Experience feature. To do this, go to Server Manager, then under Features Summary, click Add Features. And then add the Desktop Experience feature. Enabling the Desktop Experience feature has made the Logon UI loading circle spin like it does in Windows 7. Enabling Desktop Experience has added Windows Media Player to Windows Server 2008 R2. It has also added personalization to the desktop right-click menu. Aero and Basic themes are now present under personalization, but they are grayed out. Even after starting the themes service, Aero and Basic are still grayed out. And the windows still don't drag in real time, and the drag box on the desktop still has a dotted outline rather than a blue transparent fill. To enable the themes, you also need to go to System Properties, then Advanced System Settings, then Performance Options, then Adjust for Best Appearance. And windows will also now move around in real time, and dragging a box on the desktop will have a blue transparent fill like in Windows 7. But it still won't have the Aero mouse cursor or desktop gadgets. Let's compare Windows 8.1 with Windows Server 2012 R2. On the left we have Windows 8.1 and on the right we have Windows Server 2012 R2. They were both released in 2013. Windows Server 2012 R2 is the server version of Windows 8.1. They are both NT version 6.3. Note that these are both the original 2013 release without the 2014 UI update. In Windows 8.1 the default wallpaper is an orange triangle pattern. In Windows Server 2012 R2 the default wallpaper is the name of the operating system in the bottom right on a solid gray background. The window skin looks similar in both. In Windows Server 2012 R2 the caption buttons have an outline, in Windows 8.1 they do not. In Windows 8.1 the menu highlight is transparent. In Windows Server 2012 R2 it is opaque. In Windows 8.1 the inactive title bar is gray, in Windows Server 2012 R2 it is a pale version of the active color. In Windows 8.1 the taskbar is transparent, in Windows Server 2012 R2 it is opaque. The Windows Server 2012 R2 skin is the same as the Windows 8 Release Preview Basic skin, and is not available in the final release of Windows 8 or 8.1. In Windows 8.1, MDI sub-windows have the Windows 7 Basic skin, in Windows Server 2012 R2, MDI sub-windows have a different skin. In Windows 8.1 when you right-click the desktop there are two options at the bottom, Screen Resolution, and Personalize. In Windows Server 2012 R2 there is only Screen Resolution, there is not Personalize. And Personalization is also missing from Control Panel. In Windows 8.1 when you drag a window around it moves in real time, in Windows Server 2012 R2 it just moves an outline and the window only moves when you let go. In Windows 8.1 when you drag a box on the desktop it has a solid blue outline and a blue transparent fill, in Windows Server 2012 R2 it has a dotted color negative outline and no fill. Windows 8.1 has both the modern mouse cursor and the classic mouse cursor available. Windows Server 2012 R2 only has the classic mouse cursor. In Windows 8.1 the Metro UI has lots of animations, in Windows Server 2012 R2 the Metro UI has no animations. They both have a Charms bar. In Windows 8.1 the Charms bar has Search, Share, Start, Devices, and Settings. In Windows Server 2012 R2 the Charms bar only has Search, Start, and Settings, it does not have Share or Devices. In Windows Server 2012 R2, Change PC Settings is missing from the bottom of the Settings Charm pane. In Windows 8.1 there are lots of Metro apps, in Windows Server 2012 R2 the only Metro app is Internet Explorer. Windows Server 2012 R2 shows administrative tools under Apps by default, Windows 8.1 does not. However, this can be changed in both. Windows Server 2012 R2 has Server Manager which Windows 8.1 does not. In Windows Server 2012 R2 there is a new file system called REFS, which is not available in Windows 8.1. In Windows Server 2012 R2 it has the name of the operating system at the bottom of the Control-Alt-Delete screen, in Windows 8.1 it does not. Same on the logon screen. In Windows 8.1 there is a power button on the login screen, in Windows Server 2012 R2 there is not. They both have a lock screen with a clock in the bottom left. In Windows 8.1 it has some circles in the background, and in Windows Server 2012 R2 it has a solid gray background. In Windows Server 2012 R2 there is an Ease of Access button on the lock screen, in Windows 8.1 there is not. In Windows 8.1 to unlock you click and drag up, in Windows Server 2012 R2 to unlock you press Ctrl-Alt-Delete. In Windows 8.1 if you enable the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement, the lock screen will then require Ctrl-Alt-Delete to unlock, instead of dragging up. And it will also have an Ease of Access button like it does in Windows Server 2012 R2. In Windows Server 2012 R2 the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement cannot be disabled. When shutting down via the Metro UI, Windows Server 2012 R2 asks for a reason. It gives a list of reasons, however it doesn't have a box to type a description. Windows 8.1 just shuts down without asking for a reason. Pressing Alt F4 on the desktop brings up the classic shutdown dialog in both. In Windows 8.1 the default action is shut down and in Windows Server 2012 R2 it is sign out. In Windows Server 2012 R2 when shutting down via the classic shutdown dialog, you still have to type a description like in previous versions of Windows Server. In Windows Server 2012 R2 when shutting down it tells you what it is actually doing. In Windows 8.1 it just says shutting down. They both have circling dots. In Windows 8.1 another way to shut down is by typing slide to shut down into the run prompt. This is not available in Windows Server 2012 R2. They both have the same boot screen. It is possible to make Windows Server 2012 R2 a bit more like Windows 8.1 by adding the Desktop Experience feature. To do this, go to Server Manager, then at the top right go to Manage, then Add Roles and Features. Then under User Interfaces and Infrastructure, add Desktop Experience. Adding the Desktop Experience feature has added the Store and PC Settings Metro apps. It has also added the Windows Media Player, Sound Recorder, and Snipping Tool desktop apps. It has also added Personalize to the desktop right-click menu. It now has both the Windows 8.1 theme and the Metro Basic theme. And you can customize the color of both the Metro Basic theme and the Windows 8.1 theme. And the Charms bar now has Share and Devices, like in Windows 8.1. But dragging a window still only moves an outline rather than moving in real time. Dragging a box on the desktop still has a dotted outline rather than a blue transparent fill. And the Metro UI still doesn't have animations. If you go to System Properties, then Advanced System Settings, then Performance Options, then Adjust for Best Appearance. Then windows will move around in real time. Dragging a box on the desktop will have a blue transparent fill, and the Metro UI will have animations. But it still won't have the modern mouse cursor. Let's compare Windows 10 Anniversary Update with Windows Server 2016. On the left we have Windows 10 Anniversary Update and on the right we have Windows Server 2016. They were both released in 2016. Windows Server 2016 is the server version of Windows 10 Anniversary Update. They are both version 16.07. They both have the same default wallpaper. The window skin looks similar in both, but in Windows 10 16.07 windows have a shadow and in Windows Server 2016 they do not. In Windows 10 16.07 when you drag a window around it moves in real time. In Windows Server 2016 it just moves an outline and the window only moves when you let go. MDI sub-windows have the Windows 7 basic skin in both. Action Center is transparent in both. They both have the same personalization options. In Windows 10 16.07 when you drag a box on the desktop it has a solid blue outline and a blue transparent fill. In Windows Server 2016 it has a dotted color negative outline and no fill. They both have the modern mouse cursor. In Windows 10 16.07 there are lots of UWP apps. In Windows Server 2016 the only UWP app is Settings. Because Windows Server 2016 doesn't have the UWP Calculator app, it comes with the Windows 7 Calculator which Windows 10 16.07 does not. They both come with Windows Media Player. In Windows 10 16.07 the UI has animations, in Windows Server 2016 it does not. Windows Server 2016 has Server Manager which Windows 10 16.07 does not. In Windows 10 16.07 the file system options are FAT32 and NTFS. In Windows Server 2016 in addition to FAT32 and NTFS there is also REFS. The Control-Alt-Delete screen looks the same in both. In Windows 10 16.07 there is a power button on the login screen, in Windows Server 2016 there is not. The lock screen has the same wallpaper in both. In Windows 10 16.07 to unlock you click and drag up, in Windows Server 2016 you press Ctrl-Alt-Delete. In Windows 10 16.07 if you enable the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement, the lock screen will then require Ctrl-Alt-Delete to unlock like in Windows Server 2016. In Windows Server 2016 the Ctrl-Alt-Delete logon requirement cannot be disabled. When shutting down via the Start menu, Windows Server 2016 asks for a reason. It gives a list of reasons, but it doesn't have a box to type a description. Windows 10 16.07 just shuts down without asking for a reason. Pressing Alt F4 on the desktop brings up the classic shutdown dialog in both. In Windows 10 16.07 the default action is shut down and in Windows Server 2016 it is sign out. In Windows Server 2016 when shutting down via the classic shutdown dialog, you still have to type a description like in Windows Server 2008 R2 and earlier. In Windows Server 2016, when shutting down, it tells you what it is actually doing. In Windows 10 16.07, it just says, shutting down. In Windows 10 16.07, it has circling dots above the text. In Windows Server 2016, it just has the text. Another way to shut down in both is by typing slide to shut down into the run prompt, and when shutting down via this method, Windows Server 2016 doesn't ask for a reason. They both have the same boot screen. In Windows Server 2016, there is no desktop experience feature to add. But you can still make it a bit more like Windows 10 16.07 by going to System Properties, then Advanced System Settings, then Performance Options, then Adjust for Best Appearance. And then Windows will have a shadow like in Windows 10 16.07. Windows will move around in real time. Dragging a box on the desktop will have a blue transparent fill, and the UI will have animations. And the shutting down screen will have circling dots above the text like in Windows 10 16.07. Let's compare Windows 10 21H2 with Windows Server 2022. On the left we have Windows 10 21H2 and on the right we have Windows Server 2022. They were both released in 2021. Windows Server 2022 is the server version of Windows 10 21H2. They are both version 21H2. They both have the same default wallpaper. Windows 10 21H2 has the weather on the taskbar. Windows Server 2022 does not. Windows 10 21H2 also has Cortana, which Windows Server 2022 does not. The window skin looks similar in both, but in Windows 10 21H2 windows have a shadow and in Windows Server 2022 they do not. In Windows 10 21H2, when you drag a window around, it moves in real time. In Windows Server 2022, it just moves an outline and the window only moves when you let go. In Windows 10 21H2, when you snap a window to the side, the preview has a soft outline. In Windows Server 2022, it has a color negative outline. They both have the same personalization options. In Windows 10 21H2, the Start menu, Action Center, and the pane at the left of Settings have an acrylic blur. In Windows Server 2022, they do not. In Windows 10 21H2, some items also have a glow that follows the mouse. In Windows Server 2022, they do not. In Windows 10 21H2, there is an option to disable transparency effects, which disables the acrylic blur and the glow that follows the mouse, like in Windows Server 2022. In Windows Server 2022, it makes no difference whether this option is enabled or disabled. In Windows 10 21H2, the UI has animations. In Windows Server 2022, it does not. In Windows 10 21H2, when you drag a box on the desktop, it has a solid blue outline and a blue transparent fill. In Windows Server 2022, it has a dotted color negative outline and no fill. They both have the modern mouse cursor. In Windows 10 21H2, there are lots of UWP apps. In Windows Server 2022, the only UWP app is Settings. Because Windows Server 2022 doesn't have the UWP Calculator app, it comes with the Windows 7 Calculator, which Windows 10 21H2 does not. They both come with Windows Media Player. In Windows 10 21H2, the Settings app has a profile bar at the top. In Windows Server 2022, it does not. Windows Server 2022 has Server Manager, which Windows 10 21H2 does not. In Windows 10 21H2, the file system options are FAT32 and NTFS. In Windows Server 2022, in addition to FAT32 and NTFS, there is also REFS. The Control-Alt-Delete screen looks the same in both. In Windows 10 21H2, the login screen background image is blurred. In Windows Server 2022, it is not. In Windows 10 21H2, there is a power button on the login screen. In Windows Server 2022, there is not. The lock screen has the same wallpaper in both. In Windows 10 22H2, to unlock, you click and drag up, and in Windows Server 2022, you press Control-Alt-Delete. In Windows 10 21H2, if you enable the Control-Alt-Delete logon requirement, the lock screen will then require Control-Alt-Delete to unlock, like in Windows Server 2022. In Windows Server 2022, the Control-Alt-Delete logon requirement cannot be disabled. When shutting down via the Start menu, Windows Server 2022 asks for a reason. It gives a list of reasons, but it doesn't have a box to type a description. Windows 10 21H2 just shuts down without asking for a reason. Pressing Alt F4 on the desktop brings up the classic shutdown dialog in both. In Windows 10 22H2, the default action is shut down, and in Windows Server 2022, it is sign out. In Windows Server 2022, when shutting down via the classic shutdown dialog, you still have to type a description like in Windows Server 2008 R2 and earlier. In Windows Server 2022, when shutting down, it tells you what it is actually doing. In Windows 10 21H2, it just says shutting down. In Windows 10 21H2, it has circling dots above the text. In Windows Server 2022, it just has the text. They both have the same boot screen. In Windows Server 2022, there is no desktop experience feature to add. But you can still make it a bit more like Windows 10 21H2 by going to System Properties, then Advanced System Settings, then Performance Options, then Adjust for Best Appearance. And then Windows will have a shadow like in Windows 10 21H2. Windows will move around in real time. Dragging a box on the desktop will have a blue transparent fill, the UI will have animations, and the shutting down screen will have circling dots above the text like in Windows 10 21H2. However, Windows Server 2022 still doesn't have transparency effects.